It began with a sentence Sarah never expected to hear in her own kitchen. Not shouted, not whispered, spoken casually, like it meant nothing. If my ex wants to visit, she will. You can't control me. The coffee machine hummed. The clock ticked. And something inside Sarah went quiet. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at the man she had built a life with and realized this wasn't about the ex. It was about respect. Hello, friends. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time is it there. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This story isn't about jealousy or insecurity. It's about the moment a woman realizes that the foundation she's been standing on has cracks she never noticed before. It's about boundaries, dignity, and the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself when everything in you wants to keep the peace. What you're about to hear is based on real events, real emotions, and a decision that changed everything. The names have been changed, but the truth remains the same. Questions rose in Sarah's mind, gentle at first, then sharp and unavoidable. Why would a married man invite his ex into their home? What history was still unfinished between them? Why did David sound so sure, almost defensive, as if he had every right and she had none? And most importantly, what does a woman do when her marriage crosses an invisible line she didn't even know existed? The story hints at something deeper. There were signs before this moment. Small ones, easy to ignore. A text message here, a defensive tone there, a name mentioned too casually over dinner. But this sentence, this one moment standing in the kitchen with morning lights streaming through the window, exposed everything. It pulled back the curtain on a pattern Sarah had been too trusting to see. Before that day, Sarah's life was steady. Not perfect, but honest. She and David met in their late 20s at a mutual friend's barbecue. He made her laugh. She made him think. They built careers, raised 2 children, survived illnesses, layoffs, and the grief of losing David's father to cancer. Their marriage wasn't the stuff of romance novels. It was dependable, built on routine and quiet affection, the kind of love that shows up in packed lunches and remembered anniversaries. Sarah believed in respect over control, trust over fear, boundaries without shouting. She had always thought of herself as secure, not the jealous type, not the woman who needed to know her husband's every move. David's ex, Laura, was from decades ago, a relationship that ended before Sarah ever entered the picture. A name that rarely surfaced. A chapter Sarah assumed was closed, sealed, and filed away in the past where it belonged. Or so she thought. Sarah worked as a school counselor, spending her days helping teenagers navigate their emotions and relationships. She prided herself on her ability to read people, to sense when something was off. Yet somehow, she had missed the signs in her own home. David was a project manager at a construction firm, practical and straightforward, or at least that's what Sarah had always believed. He wasn't the type to reminisce about old flames or keep photos from past relationships. That's why when Laura's name started appearing more frequently, Sarah dismissed it. Old friends reconnecting, she told herself. Nothing unusual. But deep down, in a place she didn't want to examine too closely, something felt different. The way David's voice changed when he mentioned her. The way he scrolled past certain messages just a little too quickly. The way he grew distant when Sarah asked simple questions. Still, she trusted him. She had built 23 years of marriage on that trust. Why would she question it now? The truth unfolded slowly, like a photograph developing in a darkroom. David explained, too calmly, that Laura was passing through town for a conference. That she needed a place to stay because hotels were expensive and they were old friends, after all. That Sarah was overreacting, making something out of nothing, letting her insecurity show. His tone was patient, almost condescending, as if he were explaining something obvious to a child. Then came the line that cut deepest, the words that would replay in Sarah's mind for weeks. You don't get to tell me who I can have in my life. The sentence hung in the air between them, heavy and final. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Not with anger, not yet, but with a dawning realization that terrified her. This wasn't about Laura. This was about power. About who got to decide what was acceptable in their marriage. About whether her feelings mattered at all. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She lay in bed beside David, listening to his steady breathing, and replayed years of compromise. The times she had bitten her tongue. The moments she had chosen peace over confrontation. The way she had bent and adjusted and made herself smaller to keep their life smooth. And she realized something that made her stomach turn. She had been respecting boundaries that David no longer believed in. She had been playing by rules he had quietly stopped following. The next morning, she tried again, calmer this time, choosing her words carefully. I'm not trying to control you. I just don't understand why you'd want your ex-girlfriend to stay in our home. Can you help me understand? David sighed. That particular sigh that said he was tired of this conversation before it even started. Sarah, we're adults. This isn't high school. People can be friends with their exes without it meaning anything. I thought you were more mature than this. Mature. The word stung because it was designed to. It shifted the blame, made her feelings seem childish and unreasonable. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a tectonic movement she couldn't name yet. She wasn't being unreasonable. She was being disrespected. And there's a difference. A crucial, undeniable difference. Over the next few days, David's mood improved. He hummed while making breakfast, checked his phone more often, smiled at messages Sarah couldn't see. He told her Laura would arrive Friday evening and stay through Sunday. 2 nights. Sarah felt like a guest in her own home, preparing for an invasion she had no power to stop. Or did she? If this story feels familiar or unsettling, comment. I'm still watching. You're not alone. Many people have stood exactly where Sarah stood, caught between love and self-respect, wondering if speaking up makes them difficult or if staying silent makes them disappear. Sarah wrestled with impossible questions that kept her awake at night and distracted during the day. Was she being insecure, or was she finally being honest with herself? Was this about jealousy, or was it about dignity? How do you stand your ground without becoming bitter? How do you protect your marriage without losing yourself in the process? She confided in her sister, Margaret, over coffee at their usual cafe. Margaret listened, stirring sugar into her cup with slow, thoughtful movements. What does your gut tell you? She asked. Sarah's eyes filled with unexpected tears. That I'm not crazy. That this is wrong. But he makes me feel like I'm the problem. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Then you have your answer. Sarah also spoke to her closest friend from work, Jennifer, who had been through a divorce 5 years earlier. Jennifer's response was more direct. He's testing you, seeing how much you'll tolerate. And every time you accept something that makes you uncomfortable, you're teaching him that your boundaries don't matter. The words hit hard because they were true. Sarah had spent so much of her marriage being the peacekeeper, the understanding wife, the woman who didn't make waves. She had prided herself on not being needy or controlling. But somewhere along the way, flexibility had become erasure. Compromise had become surrender. She thought about her own advice to the students she counseled. What would she tell a teenage girl whose boyfriend dismissed her feelings? What would she say to a young woman learning to set boundaries? She would tell her that love doesn't ask you to ignore your instincts, that respect is not optional, that you teach people how to treat you by what you accept. But knowing and doing are different countries, separated by an ocean of fear. Fear of being alone, fear of disrupting her children's lives, fear of being wrong, of overreacting, of losing a marriage over something others might consider small. Yet Sarah understood something deeper now, something that had been forming in her mind like a storm gathering strength. Boundaries only work when both people respect them. She couldn't force David to choose her over his past, but she could choose herself. She could decide what she would and wouldn't accept in her own life, in her own home, in her own marriage. The decision formed slowly, not in anger, but in clarity. Sarah began to prepare, not for battle, but for peace. Her peace. Friday arrived with unseasonable warmth. Sarah cleaned the house with methodical precision, made fresh sheets for the guest room, stocked the refrigerator. David watched her with visible relief, probably thinking her silence meant acceptance. He didn't know she was preparing for something entirely different. When Laura's car pulled into the driveway at 6:30 that evening, Sarah was calm. She had spent the day in quiet meditation, centering herself, remembering who she was before this marriage, before the compromises, before she learned to make herself smaller. Laura was attractive in an effortless way, with graying hair she wore with confidence and a warm smile that seemed genuine. She hugged David just a moment too long. Sarah noticed. She noticed everything now. You must be Sarah, Laura said, extending her hand. I've heard so much about you. Thank you for having me. I know this might be a little awkward. Sarah shook her hand, her grip firm. Not awkward at all. she lied smoothly. Dinner was polite, filled with stories Sarah wasn't part of. Inside jokes from a shared past. Do you remember when? Whatever happened to? Laughter that excluded her from a corner of her own dining room table. David was more animated than Sarah had seen him in years, his eyes bright, his gestures expansive. This was a version of him she didn't recognize, or perhaps had never known. After dinner, as Laura and David settled in the living room with wine, reminiscing about college parties and road trips and people Sarah would never meet, something crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. This wasn't an innocent visit. It was unfinished emotional business. Nostalgia disguised as friendship. A door David had never fully closed, and now he had invited it to swing wide open in the home he shared with his wife. Sarah excused herself, went upstairs, and began to pack. Not frantically, not dramatically, methodically. She folded clothes, gathered toiletries, packed her laptop and the book on her nightstand. She moved through the familiar bedroom like she was checking into a hotel, detached and efficient. When she came downstairs 20 minutes later with her suitcase, the conversation stopped. David looked up, confused. "What are you doing?" Sarah set her bag down gently by the door. Her voice was steady, almost soft. "You're welcome to have whoever you want in your life, David. I can't control that, but I won't stay here while you do it. I'm going to Margaret's." David laughed, actually laughed, a nervous sound that died quickly when he saw her face. "You're being ridiculous. You can't just leave." "I'm not leaving," Sarah corrected. "I'm choosing myself. There's a difference." Laura looked uncomfortable now, setting down her wine glass. "Maybe I should go to a hotel." "No," Sarah said, surprising herself with her firmness. "You were invited. Stay. Enjoy your visit. I hope you both have a wonderful weekend." That was the moment power shifted. Not with shouting or ultimatums. With quiet, dignified action. Sarah picked up her keys, her suitcase, and walked out the door of her own home. The cool evening air hit her face, and with it came something unexpected. Not sadness, not anger, relief. Sarah stayed at Margaret's house for 2 weeks. In that time, she didn't call David, didn't text to check in, didn't apologize or explain further. She simply gave him the space he had demanded and took the space she needed. The first few days were hard. She second-guessed herself constantly, wondered if she had overreacted, if she should have tried harder to communicate. But Margaret reminded her gently, "You did communicate. For years. You just didn't listen until you stopped talking and started walking." The silence that followed did what arguments never could. David tried calling on Sunday night, after Laura left. Sarah didn't answer. He texted, asking when she was coming home. She replied simply, "When I'm ready." He grew frustrated, then worried, then something new. Reflective. On day 10, David showed up at Margaret's door. He looked tired, smaller somehow. "Can we talk?" Sarah stepped outside, closed the door behind her. They stood on the porch in the late afternoon light. "I didn't understand," David began, his voice rough. "I thought you were being controlling." But Laura said something before she left. She asked why I had invited her if I was married. She said it was disrespectful to you, and to her, to play games with old feelings. Sarah waited, arms crossed. David continued, words coming slowly, painfully. "I've been taking you for granted, thinking that because you never complain much, everything was fine. I forgot that trust isn't permission to do whatever I want. It's a responsibility." They didn't fix everything that day. Sarah didn't come home yet. But real conversations began. They started counseling the following week. David began to understand the difference between freedom and respect. Sarah learned that setting boundaries didn't make her difficult, it made her healthy. The road was long. Some days were better than others. They had to rebuild trust brick by brick, conversation by conversation. But the foundation was different now, built on honesty instead of assumptions, on mutual respect instead of one-sided compromise. 6 months later, they were still together, still working, still learning. Sarah had learned the most important lesson of all. Love without boundaries is self-betrayal. Calm strength is more powerful than anger. You don't control people, you control your presence. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for a marriage is to refuse to lose yourself in it. Sarah's story ends quietly, but powerfully. Not with revenge, not with drama, with clarity. The kind that only comes when you stop negotiating with your own dignity. When you realize that peace at any price is too expensive. When you understand that you can love someone deeply and still refuse to accept disrespect. What would you have done? stayed silent, or stood firm? Would you have packed your bags, or would you have tried to make it work from inside the discomfort? And where in your life right now are boundaries waiting to be honored? Where have you been making yourself smaller, quieter, more acceptable at the cost of your own peace? These aren't easy questions, but they're necessary ones. Subscribe for more real-life stories that speak to the heart, the mind, and the quiet strength within us all. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.